Welcome and thank you for joining us for the last session of the first day of the YSI plenary. We're so glad you're here with us, and we're happy to go out with a bang in this very last session. We have another Nobel laureate for you here with us, George Akerlof, over in the constellation of the role of economists. If you're watching from the stream, remember you can join us in the Zoom via ysiplenary.org. Find the constellation, role of economists in the starry sky, so you can bring the questions that you think are most pertinent up to George Akerlof for his consideration. Join us there. Let's go.
Let me ask you this. What is an economist? An abstract observer of markets and process, charting their disasters and prosperous progress? Are they just math nerds or august philosophers? It may not be obvious, even if you're an economist, just what the object of being an economist is, starting with this. Are you neutral observers, or are you in the business of customer service? And if you are, is the customer the public or persons with personal wealth with the strings to the purses? Is it a natural science of observable facts, or a social science that creates and refracts within the cultural prism? Do its promises and pacts represent the general welfare or political pacts? That's the question, and as it gets renewed, there's no one who can give it a good answer until we do it. Even if we don't yet all agree on what they're doing, at least we can agree, economists are human.
Welcome to this question fair session. My name is Mads Vestergaard, and I'm your question moderator for this session. To provide the right answers and to be able to provide the right solutions to the challenges we are facing in this historical moment in time, first of all, the right questions must be asked. And this is why we are here, not to answer questions, but to settle on the questions themselves, collaborating on finding the most pertinent economic questions in our historical situation to guide future YSI research and collaboration in the 21st century. Even this kind of session, with its strict focus on the questions, is a kind of novel and diverse for traditional talks and conference sessions. The practice of focusing on the questions themselves is well known to most of us. Think of this situation where we have a young scholar coming to a supervisor asking, could this be a good research question for a research project, for a PhD, for a collaborative project? Then the point is to qualify and to make this question even better as a research question. So the first part of this session will work as a collaborative question incubator. While our speaker, Professor George Akerlof, is talking, you will be invited to suggest new questions and to like questions suggested by others in relation to the talk. The question suggestions receiving most likes and most support will then be passed on to our speaker for comments. And the question that get most likes will also be submitted to the question graph and become a part of the Galaxy as such, which may become a part of the 100 top questions that will guide our future research and work. During the speaker's talk, everybody on this Zoom call will be muted as we, of course, listen to the talk and concentrate on engaging with the platform and suggesting questions. Afterwards, we will open for discussion when we get to the rephrasing of the question part. But we'll get back to that when we come to that. So, without further ado, I would like to pass on the word to Eva Pavanova to introduce our speaker. Take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's session. I would like to say welcome to our speaker today, Professor George Akerlof. Professor Akerlof is an American economist and a professor of economics at the University of California, Berkeley. He won the 2001 Nobel Prize in Economics together with Michael Spence and Joe Stiglitz. Our speaker today received his undergraduate degree at the University of Yale and his PhD from MIT. In addition to UC Berkeley, he has also taught at the London School of Economics. He has contributed to the fields of information and identity economics, amongst others, and is perhaps best known for his article, The Market for Lemons, Quality Uncertainty and the Market Mechanism. which was published in QJE in 1970. Today, Professor Akerlof will discuss the role of economists in society. And without further ado, Professor Akerlof.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for coming to this talk. So I'm going to base the talk on a book I published. I'm going to see, can you see the, I don't know whether people can see the slides, but I'm going to base the talk on a book I published a few years ago with Robert Schiller. And the book is called Fishing for Fools. Eva, can you see the slides? Yeah, okay. All right. So the first and the most fundamental motivation of this book is to challenge the view of the public and also of economists that whatever markets do is right. So such belief has a problem that's seldom discussed. Now, of course, all of this would take into account income distribution and such things as pollution. But there's also another very serious downside. The book explores the notion, I'm going to give you a new slide. The book explores the notion that markets are the playing field for deception and manipulation. Why? Because they spawn what we call fishing for fools. Now, all economists know this. Everybody who's listening to me now knows this. But that leads to the second very general motivation. The rule of what can and what cannot be published be in economics leaves holes. There are some perfectly valid and important things to say, but there's no way to say them that would be acceptable in any journal. For example, quite a few economists thought that there could be something like the financial crisis of 2008. But economists could not figure out a way to express these views. We couldn't express these views in the form of a paper that would serve as sufficient warning that yes, such a thing might occur and it might come. So I believe that fishing for fools is one of those holes in economics because we all know it, it cannot be published. But then because it cannot be published in journal form, it gets ignored. And because it was ignored, we had the financial crisis, whose legacy, even now in times of COVID, has been the central event in the economic history of our times. So with the rise of the new nationalism, we continue to see its aftermath. But then the book also has a subtext. It's a subtext which I'm going to tell you about later. A subtext which gradually becomes increasingly important as the book proceeds and as my talk is going to proceed. That subtext concerns a principal way in which we think and that results in our being fish for fools. And as I said, I'm going to come to that later. Okay. So let's see, we were trying to get a next slide. Yeah. So with these prefatory notes, let me begin with the theory. The book is based on conversations with the psychologist Danny Kahneman some 30 years ago. In a conversation then, Danny told me that the basis for psychology was that we humans are machines. We are machines that are prone to error. The job of the psychologist then is to ferret out that error. In contrast, he said, the basic fundamental notion of economics is equilibrium. That equilibrium means that if there's a profit left on the table, someone will take up that opportunity for profit. Now, you know that because you see it every time you go to the grocery store. What happens there? People sequentially choose what they think is the shortest line, and then in equilibrium, the lines are almost the same length. So, I'm going to give you a new slide. So, how to put together Danny's insight into economics. Danny's insight says the free markets will not just provide what we really want. That's only the case if we human machines are making the right choices. But free markets will also provide us with wrong choices. And we all know that. As economists, they will do so as long as there is a profit to be made. So let me restate. The principle means that if we have some weakness or other in the equilibrium, that weakness will be taken up if there's a profit to be made. So what does that mean? That means that among business persons who are looking around and deciding where to spend their investment dollars, some will look to see if there are unusual profits from our weaknesses. And if they see such an opportunity for a profit, they will zoom in on that. That will be what they choose. So as a result, economists will have a fishing equilibrium. What is a fishing equilibrium? That is an equilibrium in which every chance for profit more than the ordinary will be taken on. But then, this is the important point, that includes our willingness to make the wrong choices. Okay, so let me give you an example, and I'm going to give you a new slide. So let's see if that comes up. Okay, Cinnabon. So I'm going to give you two examples. The first example is Cinnabon, and the motto of Cinnabon is life needs frosting. There we are. There's the Cinnabon. I don't know whether you can see it, but I can see it on my screen. Okay. So most Americans simply take it for granted. We take it for granted that there just happens to be an outlet right there selling Cinnabons where we're waiting for our delayed flight or if we're at the shopping mall with our children. All those outlets and all that cinnamon, which undermines our diets, they are a natural result of a free market equilibrium. I'm going to now give you another example, which is Capuchin monkeys. The second example then comes from a metaphor, and that was invented by Bob Schiller. So Keith Chen and Venkat Lakshminarayanan and Laurie Santos taught Capuchin monkeys how to use money to trade. The monkeys developed an appreciation of price, they saved, and they did other transactions, which I'm not going to tell you about. But let's go beyond those experiments. Let's do a thought experiment. Okay? Suppose we open the monkeys up to trading with humans quite generally. We would give a large population of Capuchins substantial incomes, and we would let them be customers of for-profit businesses run by humans, and we were not going to allow any regulatory safeguard for those poor Capuchins. Well, you can easily imagine that the free market system, with its taste for profits, would supply whatever the monkeys are going to choose to buy. Well, we would expect an economic equilibrium with concoctions appealing to strange Capuchin tastes. But amid this monkey cornucopia, their choices would be very different from what makes them happy. So how do we know? Well, we know from Chen, Lakshminarayanan, and Santos that they love sweet fruit roll-up tacos with marshmallow fluff. Capuchins have limited ability to resist temptations. So we have every expectation that they would become anxious, malnourished, exhausted, addicted, quarrelsome, and sickened. That's a line that comes from Bob. So that's what's going to happen to those poor Capuchins. But of course, our story is not about Capuchins. It's about a story about us humans. Okay, so now I'm going to give you a new slide. Let's see. Okay, two types of taste. We now come to the point of this thought experiment. We shall see what it has to say about us humans. Our view of the monkeys has analyzed their behavior is that they have two types of what economists call tastes. The first type of taste are what the Capuchins would exercise if they made the decisions that are good for them. Second type of taste, their fruit roll-up taco taste, are those that they actually exercise. Well, humans are no doubt smarter than monkeys, but we can view our behavior in the same terms. So we can imagine us humans, like the Capuchins, as also having two different types of taste. So we have two different types of taste. The first concept of taste describes what's really good for us. But as in the case of the Capuchins, that's not always the basis for all of our decisions. The second concept of taste is the taste that determines how we really make our choices, and those choices may not, in fact, be good for us. The distinction between the two types of taste in the example of the Capuchins then gives us an image. We can think about our economy as if we all have monkeys on our shoulders there when we go shopping or when we make economic decisions. Those monkeys on our shoulders, they're in the form of the weaknesses that have been exploited by marketers for ages. Because of those weaknesses, many of our choices differ from what we really want, Or alternatively stated, they differ from what's good for us. So we're not generally aware of that monkey on our shoulders. So in the absence of some curbs on markets, we reach an economic equilibrium where the monkeys on the shoulders are substantially calling the shots. So what does this say about economics in general? So what does it say, for example, about general equilibrium? The modern rendition of Adam Smith's invisible hand statement, as you all know, is that a competitive free market equilibrium is, quote unquote, Pareto optimal. What does that mean? That means that once such an economy is in equilibrium, it's impossible to improve the economic welfare of everyone. For example, a change that would cause Eva's welfare to go up would cause my welfare or someone else's to go down. Any interference is going to make someone worse off. The theory, of course, recognizes some factors that might blemish such an equilibrium of competitive free markets, and we've already talked about that, such as problems of pollution and problems of income distribution. But with those qualifications, the result is believed by economists to be true. But then think about it. With completely free markets, there's not only freedom to choose, there is also freedom to fish. It will still be true that the equilibrium is going to be Pareto optimal, but it will be an equilibrium that's optimal not in terms of what we really want. It'll be equilibrium that's optimal instead in terms of our monkey on our shoulder tastes. And that, for the monkeys as for ourselves, will lead to manifold problems. While standard economics has ignored this obvious difference, because most economists, and that includes myself, most economists have thought that for the most part, people do know what they want. That means that there's nothing much to be gained from examining the difference between what we really want and what those monkeys on our shoulders are instead telling us. But think about it. That ignores the field of psychology, which is for the most part, psychology is for the most part, that's for the most part about the effects of those monkeys. It also ignores another fact that's not in psychology, the fact that competitive equilibrium will also involve people generating information that will lead us astray insofar as that's legal and insofar as there's a profit to be made by it. So it ignores that markets enable what we call fishing for fools. So where does that take us? So the onus is on us. The onus on Bob Schiller and myself in the book is then to indicate that in real life, this equilibrium does affect our lives. And so we have 4 areas of nobody could possibly want in which we're seriously fished, for fools. Okay. So here are those 4 areas. Area 1 of no one could possibly want is personal financial instability. So a fundamental fact of economic life has never made it into the economics textbooks. Most adults, even in rich countries, go to bed at night worried about how to pay the bills. Now, economists think that it's easy for people to spend according to a budget. We shall see later that it isn't. So no one wants to go to bed at night worried about the bills, yet no, most people do. So go to the next one of nobody could possibly want. Financial and macroeconomic instability. So fishing for fools in financial markets is the leading cause of the financial crises that lead to the deepest recessions. So it's true. Every time it is different. The stories are different. The entrepreneurs are different. Their offerings are different. But also every time it is the same. Why is it the same? There are the fishermen and there are the fools. And then when the built-up stock of undiscovered fishes, which was named the bezel by John Kenneth Galbraith, gets discovered, asset prices crash. So in the crisis of 2008, the investment managers who had purchased the overrated securities or who had insured them could not have possibly wanted them. So that's area 2. Let's go to area 3 of nobody possibly wants. That's ill health. So here we discuss how the pharmaceuticals in the United States do their fishing with a pH, and how the food industry, again with a pH, fills us with sugar, salt, and fat. So just think about it. Think of the opioid problem in the United States. And that is a really serious problem. There were more than 48,000 suicides in 2018 alone. And this is a very, very serious problem. So that's ill health. No one wants bad medicine. Furthermore, about 69% of American adults are overweight. And turns out with the most recent statistics, more than 40% of American adults are obese, yet no one wants to be obese. And then think about it again. There's tobacco, which according to the US Center for Disease Control is responsible for 20% of deaths. Okay, we'll give you one fourth area. And especially in today of all days, one sees this area of nobody could possibly want, and that's bad government. So just as free markets work at least tolerably well under ideal conditions, so does democracy. But politics is vulnerable to the simplest fish, where politicians silently gather money from the interest and use that money to show that they are just one of the folks back home. So a chapter of the book describes a campaign by Charles Grassley, of Iowa, recently reelected, who gathered a multi-million-dollar war chest and showered the state with TV ads. And Grassley in these ads, he's just one of us back home. And he's back home, and what he's doing is he's riding his lawnmower around and carving out these beautiful concentric ellipses of fantastic Iowa grass. And then in the background to this was beautifully done by a designer. In the background to these beautiful ellipses of beautiful Iowa grass, in the same tone, there's a barn in red of the exact same tone of red that the grass ellipses are green. And he's just saying, I'm just one of the folks back home, and that's what I really like to do, is to ride my lawnmower. Yeah, he does. Yeah, sure he does. Okay. So that's another one. But I think we all now have much better examples than what we gave in the book. And hopefully we're not going to get that to come, but who knows what's up. Okay, so let's go to next slide. Okay. So now I'm going to give you the taste of one chapter of the book. Okay. So the picture up there is of Suze Orman. So that's Suze Orman, the picture. So there may be many of you, especially many of you who are in different continents from the United States, do not know Suze Orman, but she's a popular US TV figure. And Suze Orman gives very loud and shrill financial advice. The remarkable thing about that is, despite how loud and shrill she is, and despite her looking at like what you see in the picture there, her audience seems to adore her and lap up her every word. When I asked an economist friend of mine about her, Gil had the predictable reaction. So this is what he said. He had watched her for only 10 seconds, and he could not stand her mommy knows best voice. And furthermore, he said her investment advice was simplistic. But there's a puzzle here, which I've already introduced. That does not explain why Orman's audiences are lapping her up. Her most popular book, Orman's most popular book, is The 9 Steps to Financial Freedom, Practical and Spiritual Steps So You Can Stop Worrying. So let's contrast what she tells us there with the portrait given of consumer spending in the economics textbooks. According to economics textbooks, we decide on our demand for the proverbial apples and oranges by choosing the bundle of apples and oranges that maximizes our happiness, subject to our budget constraint. But Suze Orman's financial advice books tells us that consumers do not follow such a textbook protocol in their purchases. So the question is, where are all economists? So we may not think about how people could do anything different, but how could consumers do anything other than what the textbooks describe? So Orman tells us that people have emotional hang-ups with regard to money and with regard to spending it. So first of all, they're not honest with themselves. And as a consequence, they do not engage in rational budgeting. So how could she know? Well, she's a financial advisor and she has a test. She asked her advisees to add up their expenditures. And those expenditures all but invariably fall short of what a documented accounting from the records later turns up. Figuratively, relative to the proverbial trip to the grocery store to buy apples and oranges, it's as if her advisees spend too much in the fruit section. And then by the time they reach dairy products, there's nothing left over for eggs and milk. Actually, we know that this occurs in real life because we know that in poor areas of town, that in fact, the milk is not bought at the end of the month, and they have to wait until people's checks come in at the beginning of the month before they are able to buy the milk for their children. So in real life, such budgetary failure translates into having nothing left over for savings. Now, this failure to deal cognitively and emotionally with money, says Orman, leads to those unpaid bills. So it's her mission to keep those bills down so that her readers and her clients will no longer worry at night. So that's the role of mommy. And it's also why those audiences are excusing that mommy knows best voice. So it's worth noting, I think you can look it up in your textbooks, more than parenthetically, that worries, as noted in Orman's subtitle, are central concerns in the financial advice books, but you don't find them in books on economics. So look to the index in Mankiw's textbooks. You don't find the word worries there. Okay. So let's give you a next slide. Okay. So we can paint a statistical portrait, which shows that this is a serious concern, and there are lots of papers. Okay? So this poses a problem. The Suze Orman view of the world suggests that people are spending too much, and they're worried as a result. So that leads to the questions why. So this takes us to the second general message from Fishing for Fools. The first message was that there was this problem about Pareto optimality and the fact that the wrong Pareto optimality was what was being maximized. Now, current behavioral economics is based on economics and psychology. But it turns out that there's now another emerging branch of economics. This branch is based on sociology rather than on psychology. So why should sociologists make a difference? So we've already seen the textbooks tell us that we should describe our behavior in the grocery store as maximizing our utility subject to a budget constraint. So that's what determines our demand for apples and for oranges. And according to the textbooks, that's the story that we're telling ourselves. The textbooks also indicate that we should use a similar story to derive most of economics. So that's why they go tell us about all those apples and oranges. You may have wondered about why you got that stuff. Well, they're not only going to tell you about apples and oranges, but then they're going to give you, for the rest of the 450 pages of the textbooks, or maybe 550 pages, they're going to use what they've gotten you into there to tell you that that's the rest of it. So perhaps, surprisingly, such derivation fails to describe much of real life. So the question arises, what's the mistake? What's the mistake in the model? So a basic mistake is that our economic models rein in on people our assumptions regarding what they care about, and then correspondingly how they behave. So it's reined in from 30,000 feet, up there from our airplanes upon those poor humans, how those humans are on the ground are supposed to behave. Well, it turns out, may be true. People may be very purposeful, as economists presume. That means that we are maximizing something. But, okay, so now I'm going to give you a new slide. Okay. So, but how people think, how people behave is determined by how they think. And now think about how they think. A good way to picture how people think and what determines how people behave is that in every moment of our lives, think about where you are now and what you're doing now. In every moment of our lives, we're living out some story. And the decisions that we make there are depending upon the stories that are our focus when we make those decisions. So while the first part of the book refers to conventional behavioral economics regarding why people may be fooled, the second part of the book emphasizes this much more general point. The point is that we're fooled with a PH because we're always telling ourselves stories. And then think about that yet again. That corresponds to the very core of both sociology and cultural anthropology. So what are people doing there in sociology and cultural anthropology? That core of those fields is ethnographies. And what are people doing with those ethnographies? Those ethnographies are uncovering those stories that people are telling themselves. And think about it yet again, it also reflects what advertisers do. So what's the mission of advertisers? Their mission is to graft onto the stories that we're already telling ourselves another story that will get us to buy their product. So in order to make our economics right, we need to base motivation on those stories that people are telling themselves. So let me give you a new slide. Okay. Before I go further, let me give an indication for the ubiquity of stories in any capitalist economy. You see it on any commercial street in any town. The shop windows induce you to tell yourself a story that gets you to come in and buy. In the United States, in the old days when I was younger, on shopping streets in suburban areas, there used to be pet stores that placed puppies in the window. Maybe none of you have ever seen that. I don't know whether they still exist. I haven't seen it in many years. And it turns out that there's an old song, and maybe some of you know it, maybe most of you don't. So Patty Pager, the singer, she's coming down the street, and she sees such a puppy, and she bursts into song. So I hope you don't mind if I sing. Okay, so I'm going to sing. So, how much is that doggy in the window? The one with the waggly tail. How much is that dog in the window? Arf, arf. I do hope that doggy is for sale. So some people know that first verse, but it turns out that very few people know what comes next. So what does it say next? Now I'm going to tell you about the next verse. Okay. So I must take a trip to California and leave, this is what Patty Page continues to sing, and leave my poor sweetheart alone. If he has a dog, he won't be lonesome, and the doggy will have a good home. So the thing is, I don't know if it's intentional. But this song has a beautiful ambiguity that exactly mirrors Fishing for Fools. Fishing for Fools, the book. So think about it. On the one hand, the girl's purchase may be marvelously considerate. Her relationship with her boyfriend may be perfect. But every time the doggy wags its tail, then the boyfriend will be reminded of their beautiful romance. So this is the doggy wagging its tail. And the boyfriend says, oh yeah, the doggy, and beautiful, I'm so glad she gave me this. Now think about the other side. On the other hand, the relationship may be a disaster. The girl may be totally scatterbrained. She was the type of girl who was going to leave him with that stupid puppy. So every time the doggy needs to be walked, the boyfriend will have to take care of it. And he will also be reminded of the failed relationship. So this is the message of Fishing for Fools. Life in a capitalist economy is therefore not just an opportunity to get what you want. It's also about the creation and spread of stories that influence you to come in and buy. So the stories are to get you to buy, irrespective of whether the purchase is good for you or not. So that's showing that, in fact, you just go out to the local suburban retail neighborhood, and you see that. You see that in every window. That's what they're trying to do. And you go that to every store. That's what they're trying to do. So the rest of my story are going to be this talk is going to be 4 stories that indicate their central role of stories in economics and politics. So let's begin. Let's begin with something that I think is just a total mess. Okay. The euro. So how did the Europeans get themselves into this terrible mess, the euro? So there's a wonderful book by Ashok Modi, and its title is called Euro Tragedy. So there was a story that the Europeans' desire for unity would allow them to easily overcome the problems of a fixed exchange rate across most of Europe. So Prime Minister Helmut Kohl had told a similar story in Germany in the late 1980s and early 1990s regarding the currency union of East and West Germany at a 1-to-1 ratio between East marks and Deutsch marks. So that was at the time of German unification between the East and the West. And then Kohl became a leading supporter of the euro. He said, okay, well, what did this work for East and West Germany, which actually didn't work very well, but he said it did. And then he said that they're going to do that with the euro for all of Europe. Well, the integration of East and West Germany had been difficult enough. It had been difficult enough because of this trade of the currencies at a 1-to-1 ratio, which was ridiculous. But if the euro was going to be, it's much worse. No single language would ease migration as it occurred between the two Germanys. So if somehow you should have been receiving the 1-to-1 ratio, you were going to be overpaid in terms of productivity by a factor of 4-to-1. Well, okay, so there aren't jobs in East Germany. If you don't like that, you can move to West Germany. And so people did that. They didn't like doing that, but they did. Nor, unlike the transfers from West to East Germany, so Kohl's government gives huge amounts of money to East Germany, and so that eased things a bit. There would be no similar transfers from richer countries to poorer countries within the Eurozone. We now know that the Germans don't very much give money to the Greeks. That's something we all know. So economists' analysis that a single currency would prevent needed exchange rate adjustments, that simply went unheeded. So the story of the benefits from the euro gained traction, and Modi tells us how the myth of the benefits of the euro escaped like a virus from official meetings. Part of that story was just magical thinking, that the problems of a fixed exchange rate would be magically solved with the wave of a desire for unity want. So this story itself has played a crucial role in the economic state of Europe today. So there is serious problems in all of Southern Europe in which the exchange rate was very much overvalued. So now let me give you another example in which a story has made a huge difference. Okay, so I'm going to give you the next story. Okay, this story is from a paper by Dennis Snower and myself, and the title of that paper is Bread and Bullets. So it begins with a joke from pre-1990 Russia. Man walks into a grocery store with a notebook. Do you have sausage? No. He makes a note. Bread? No. He makes another note. 20 years ago, they would have shot you for making notes like that, says a woman waiting in line. No bullets either, he writes. So the joke illustrates the Soviet system at every scale. So our article then demonstrates the role of the Soviet story. According to that story, the Soviet plan for force-fed industrialization would create a new paradise on Earth. So this story then legitimated extreme cruelty against anyone accused of resisting the plan. But then even worse, ruthless men like Stalin falsely accused their opponents of resistance to the plan. In terms of modern terminology, they said it was fake news. And then they used the sanctions legitimated by the Soviet story to eliminate those opponents. So that's that story. And I think that's basic to what happened in the Soviet Union. And if we think about what almost happened today, but actually didn't here in the United States, this is this idea of being able to call on fake news if it doesn't accord to your dictatorial desires, that's something that we see and we have seen elsewhere. And we see it, unfortunately, in an increasing number of places around the world. So let's turn to another story. But okay, so one thing is, if you think about this and you think about fake news, I feel that this is a big area in this use of fake news. I think you can think about that. This is a major thing for economists to be discussing. Okay, so let's turn to another story. This time, we economists did not do so well. So I'm sorry about this. I apologize. Okay, so I'm going to give you the next slide. Okay. Financial derivatives. According to standard economic theory, in the absence of externalities, the equilibrium of a free market, competitive equilibrium will be Pareto optimal. You all know that. In the 1990s, financial derivatives of many different complicated types were introduced. But economists offered very few warnings, maybe in some sense, perhaps none at all. Economists told the story, most economists told the story that the new securities would be benign. The new securities, what they do, they would help people hedge against risk. Well, based on this reasoning, and I can give you an exact quotes from that, but I'm not going to give that to you here. The U.S. Commodities Futures Modernization Act of 2000 greatly restricted the regulation of financial derivatives. So the story behind this deregulation failed to see that financial markets serve two functions. So first of all, they match savers with investors, and that's good. But think about it on another side. Financial markets can also be a gambling casino. That poses problems for the uninformed. The securities can dupe people into taking risks they had never intended. And then those people go bust. So the leverage taken out with derivatives have made world financial markets more fragile, in fact, permanently more fragile. So the description of how this happened is then the subject of 3 chapters in Fishing for Fools. So everyone in financial markets know that this story of fishing for fools is true. They know that every time they buy or sell a security, they should have to think about why that person on the other side of the market is selling or buying that security. And they know that they should be careful. So you know that this is a central part of how financial works, but it is often forgotten. Now, I must confess that I know for myself that I've forgotten this principle in several important transactions that I've made that I do not want to confess publicly. And I've seen it. I've seen a whole room full of economists and people who study this self make such a decision without realizing that they may be fished for a fool in exactly that way. And it has happened. So if you want to laugh, you think about that. So this is just a part of life. So in the words of Jane Austen's character, Mr. Bennet, for what do we live but to make sport of our neighbors and to laugh at them in our turn? Okay. So let me give you another story. So this other story, it's yet worse than financial crises. Because this is really a very serious story. Okay, so let me give you the next one. Okay, yeah, so I'm sure almost everybody who's listening has this on your mind. So think about global warming. So the first inconvenient truth of global warming is the physical problem of climate change itself. But then there's a second inconvenient truth. That second inconvenient truth is the story the public tells itself. At the extreme, and this isn't just in the extreme, in the United States, that story says that global warming is a hoax. Yet more prevalent, at least if you look at the questionnaires, is a failure to perceive the urgency of counteracting global warming. And yet do we see? We see that year after year after year is slipping by, and every year the threat is getting ever worse. Okay, so those are my 4 stories that I'm going to tell. So now let me give you a summary and conclusion. Okay. So the book Fishing for Fools then gives us 2 major points. First point, the Pareto optimality of competitive free markets is not the Pareto optimality of our what's good for you taste, it's the Pareto optimality of our monkey on the shoulder taste. What does that mean? That means if you have some weakness from which someone can make a profit, that someone somewhere will find it profitable to set up a business to take advantage of your weakness. And that's what happens in a fishing equilibrium. So Fishing for Fools gives example after example after example of that principle. Now, I learned something myself. You know, I've been in economics for a long time, and I'm sort of surprised that even at this age, I seem to be learning fundamental things. I think I didn't appreciate until I wrote this thing about the wonders of general equilibrium. It means that if there's somebody somewhere, anywhere in the world who can make a profit, it can give you something that you can buy, then in fact that's going to occur. And that could be something that you really want. So think about how tremendously successful capitalism has been. And you listen to Milton Friedman, he's going to tell you all about how wonderfully successful it is. It's been so successful, if we're going back to global warming, that we humans have taken over the planet in such a way that unbeknownst to us and without thinking about it, we're about to destroy the planet. And we have this incredibly high level of the standards of living, something that when I was young, you wouldn't have ever contemplated. So we're on the cusp of solving the problems of global economic poverty. It's a wonder. It's really wonderful. So so when I was 27, I spent a year in India. At the time, the per capita income was $50 per year. Now, India's still poor by, let's say, US standards, but it's not poor the way it was then. So I remember arriving at the Delhi airport and driving into town. And I must say, it was the second year of a bad monsoon. And I must say that everybody there, everybody I saw, not quite everybody, but there was people who were so thin that you could just see automatically that they were malnourished. You just knew that. And you could just see poor poverty. And I feel that to a remarkable extent, we're now in the process of curing that. And so that, I think, is something that has developed from this general equilibrium. And it isn't that it isn't good, but fishing for... But there's also the other style of fishing for fools, and that is that we can also buy things that individually and collectively we don't want. So that takes us to the second message of fishing for fools. Oh, and in the general equilibrium sense, it may be somebody from who knows where, so my example of that is someone from Bhutan, because that's usually given as the example of one of the world's happiest places where everybody's the most nice. And so even if somebody in Bhutan decided they wanted to sell you something that you might not be good for you, they might want to do that and make a profit. But then the second message of this is fishing for fools also teaches that the world's problems, they're not just the fundamental physical problems like global warming itself. Those problems also include the stories that people tell themselves that get us into physical problems. So those stories also keep us then from dealing with those problems effectively when they arise. So the stories and how they arise, they should be a part of our economics itself. And as illustrations of the role of those stories, we saw the euro, we saw communism, we saw financial derivatives, we saw global warming, and we also saw the doggy. So counteracting stories that lead to bad outcomes needs to be a major function of economic policy in every country at every level worldwide. And of course, that should be a major job for all of you and for all of us economists. Okay, so thank you very much. And thank you very much for listening for so long to this, and I'm very appreciative.
Thank you so much for your talk, Professor Akerlof. It was incredibly interesting. We have time for one question, which it would be great if you could address. Again, it's not about answering the question, but sort of just thinking about it and discussing how we can brainstorm more about it. And it is essentially, how does data mining, in your opinion, influence the practice of fishing for fools?
Okay. Thank you for asking that question. You know what? There's a wonderful book about this. I'm not sure that everybody in the audience has read this. There's a wonderful book by Carl Bergstrom and a co-author, Kevin West, and it's called Calling Bullshit. And this talks about all kinds of problems. And it's exactly on this, on such problems as data mining and how that can occur. Now, data mining, all right, so let me give you the opposite of what is data mining. Okay, so this is something that I teach in my class. So I don't know whether everybody knows Oken's law, but Oken's law is very useful. Oken's law says that a 1% change in the unemployment rate in the United States leads to a 2% change in GDP. And It was invented by Arthur Oken. And when Arthur Oken was the chair of the Council of Economics Advisors, which was very important in his time. And then when he left there, he went to Brookings, and he and his co-editor of Brookings' papers, they had a game that they played. And the game that they played was the following, that just by rule of thumb, you could approximate what in any statistic that you were going to look at. So that's what he was doing with Oken's law. Oken's law is just very useful for all kinds of things. It's very useful in terms of making the transition, which you sometimes want to do, between unemployment rates and GDP. And so you can just see, and it tends to hold all the time. Now, what I give in my class is I tell them about a trip that I took outside of Berkeley with my brother. Okay. And we went on a hiking trip. And we climbed a pretty small mountain, very small, only 1,000 feet or maybe even 700 feet or something like that. And it was a very clear winter day. And we could see across the Sierras. And my brother and we saw that there was white, which was there. And my brother asked the question, were we seeing snow or were we seeing clouds? Okay. And he's a physicist. And so he did the following. I don't know whether people can see this. He took his hand and he looked like this. And his fingers were an inch apart. And then he asked me, how far is it across the Central Valley? And I told him it's 100 miles across the Central Valley. And he said, okay, well, then the height of those mountains, and how high are the mountains? The mountains are 10,000, or about 10,000 feet. Maybe he knew that. And they said, okay, it's snow, it's not clouds, because he knew, he could tell how high it was. He was able to triangulate. So I got from that, I got the feeling that what a very good physicist does is the best physicists, what they do is they play this game that Art and George Perry were playing, is they do the opposite of data mining. The opposite of data mining is you understand your statistics well enough to know whether you're being fished for fools by the data mine. And so if you really understand your data, and I understand there are some very, very good economists who are just very good at this. And I think that's, okay, so I'm taking too long to answer your question. I think that's what Raj Chetty does. So I think people say, okay, look at Raj Chetty. What he does is he just gives you this data. And so what? He doesn't really bat you over the head with the identification problem. Then I think he leads you up. It leads it up to you to take that data and then do some triangulation on that. Okay, so I don't know whether I should. So I can tell you what I did with the Raj Chetty data set. So he calculated neighborhood by neighborhood. I don't think, maybe it was even zip code by zip code, the transition rate of people using census out of poverty over their lifetimes. And so what I did was I wanted to know, I wanted to get some idea. Well, was this useful or was it not? And so what I took was I took my very own neighborhood in Berkeley, and I looked at, well, what would happen? And did that correspond to what I believed? So when people are possibly doing data mining, my view is we should also look at that and say, well, was that really believable? And then you can look at something else. So I'm not sure data mining is. I'm not sure data mining is so much of a curse. I think we should be careful about it. But maybe the people who are doing the data mining are giving you numbers that actually are what you should believe. Maybe they're trying to play the role of that ethnographer and the sociologist, and they're trying to tell the story. Now the question is, maybe they're trying to pull a fast one on us. So remember I was talking about the ethnographer and the sociologist? Now economists say, no, we don't listen to that stuff. Now the thing is, are they doing data mining? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe when they tell the stories in sufficient detail, you can actually perceive what the people are thinking, and then you can do your own interpretation to tell you whether, in the words of Carl Bergstrom, whether they're really giving you bullshit or not. Anyway, that's a long answer to a very, very good question.
Yeah, no, thank you. That was a great answer. It was only one of the answers from our participant in the question constellations, but hopefully Matt will now be able to discuss some of the other ones. But I just want to say thank you again. It was a great talk, and it was wonderful to have you.
Okay, thank you. It was a great pleasure. So I hope, and thank you to the audience, especially for attending. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
That's it, folks. Thank you so much. That was fabulous.
The question we have settled on during this session, the question that has received most communal and collaborative support, first of all, the question that was put forward for comment for our speaker. How does data mining influence the practice of fishing for fools? And then the other question was, how does the notion of the utility maximizing rational agent work as ideology, justifying unregulated markets and their results? And the third one that has been submitted for this question from this session, because it had also sufficient lot of support, is, what is the best way to address the issue of the non-existence of positive economics? All right, so let's take the questions one by one and see if we might be able to rephrase them in a even more pertinent way than the original formulation. So now I'm going to allow for new phrasings, and you can still support different phrasings by moving or putting your hearts, putting your likes. This is what will, and if a phrasing of a question get more likes than the original, it will take over and become the question. But this also means that the original question has the incumbent advances. So a new phrasing has to really gain some support, which is also a reason why it is a good idea to motivate your rephrasing. And this is also why we can now open the floor. If everybody has something to say, you can take the floor and you can motivate your phrasing suggestions or get into discussion about the questions themselves. But let's start out with the first one, which is already public highlighted. How does data mining influence the practice of fishing for fools? Anybody has a interesting rephrasing for this? I'm thinking, what would Suboff have to say? Does surveillance capitalism maybe come into this?
May I say something?
Yes, please.
Because, of course, data mining, in the way how it's phrased now, you really think of surveillance, but you could also imagine that you can use the technology to warn people. Or so it should be phrased in a way that we can, that it also can be used for the good.
Yes.
So for example, in a project I'm working on with banks, we are using data mining to analyze the language that's being used between certain departments. So for example, to check whether the compliance people are not too much intimidated, which is really good.
Yes. So what I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, is that that data mining actually could be a way of undermining the practice of fishing for food, making it harder to trick people.
Yeah, it could do both. Yeah, because on the one hand, of course, you use data mining to very precisely target people, like how Cambridge Analytica was doing that. But you can also use it to signal what Twitter is doing now, using data mining to fish out misleading mails or misleading tweets.
All right, I also see here now new suggestions of rephrasings for the original questions are coming up. We have here this rephrasing suggestion: what are the social implications of data mining? And that rephrasing has already gotten 3 likes. And now we also got the third one, which is actually pretty much in line with what I'm hearing you're saying. Could data mining be used for good?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, it might could. All right. I see what are the social implications of data mining is gaining in. It's gaining speed. It's getting momentum. It's gaining momentum. It's almost there. It's almost like it's surpassing the incumbent question. And now we have a new race leader for the phrasing of the question about data mining. Oh, and now we have a tie. Now we have tie between the original formulation, the original phrasing, and the new phrasing. They're both 7-7. It's always interesting what you do if an election ends in a tie. But now, yes.
Let's recount it.
Yes. Now we have, okay, there's a hardcore, really close battle going on here. I will let it play out while we then can address the next question, and people can like away, and then we'll see how it ends. Let's look at the next question. How does the notion of the utility maximizing rational agent work as ideology justifying unregulated markets and their results? Any suggestions for rephrasing this? Also rather popular question. It maybe just been hitting the spot the first. Okay, now we have a contender. Oh yes, we have one here. Does the assumptions of economic theory play an ideological function? Oh, and it already got some support there. Yes, a little bit more. Oh, I'm just looking back at the first battle with this data mining, and now it's the social implications of data mining that is far in the lead. It seems like to be heading for victory. Not victory. Heading for sufficient support to become the question. And for the next question, we still have a little battle going on here. A little battle. We have 6 likes on the original incumbent phrasing, and now we got 3 on the new suggestion. All right, I will address the last one of the 3 submitted questions from this session and see where we get with the rephrasing part. What is the best way to address the issue of the non-existence of positive economics? That is the question right now. Could it be made more pertinent, more inclusive, more relevant to the situation we are in? Is the non-existence of positive economics a given? All right, we have a new rephrasing suggestion. Should economics accept that it's always normative? Yeah, it got some support, but we still have what is the best way to address the issue of the non-existence of positive economics as the question. Number 3. All right, we have another contender. How do we broaden the economics area of interest beyond purely economic theory by engaging with other social sciences? Oh, and and this is kind of a fun one, I gotta say. I like it, but this is a fun one. Is there such a thing as positive economics? And now we got another. How can economics be formulated in a positive science? All right, it seems like it's still the incumbent phrasing of the question that is leading. But we can let this play out while we go to the final part of this session. And this is the part where you can provide your favorites. And now I'm allowing favorites, which means that you can see a little star coming up to the left of the questions. And those stars are different from the hearts. The hearts are your likes. That's what you are supporting during one session. They're local to each constellation and each session. And it's about to see which kind of question get the most support to join the galaxy, the question graph. And the stars, on the other hand, those are galactic or global, you could say. The stars are not they're not localized to the sessions, but they are running all over the plenary and across all constellations and all questions. And those stars you use for making your favorite questions. And these stars will be used all over the plenary. And it's the aggregated number of stars or favorites that a question have had, which will make it to become a part of the top 100 questions to be decided on during this plenary. Those questions that you favorite by providing a star will also be displayed at your YSI profile. This also means that they can become, they can pave way for further research and collaboration. And it also means that they become guiding stars for future YSI projects. You only have a limited number of stars, and when you've used them up, you'll see the message that you have to remove a star to put a new one. So there's a principle of scarcity here that applies. But now you can place your favorites. You will be able to do that all over the plenary. But we end each question, input talk, question session, fair session out with providing the opportunity of you to providing stars for some of the question that has been raised or submitted in this session. Okay, while you're providing stars, I'm looking at the results for the support process of the questions. We definitely have a clear winner in the data mining question, and that'll become I think I'll be able to call this now what are the social implications of data mining? This is the leading question and the phrasing of this question that will be joining the galaxy and the question graph from this session. And the next question that will join the galaxy and the question graph from this section has we actually have a tie here. It is either going to be, what is the best way to address the issue of the non-existence of positive economics? Or it's going to be, is there such a thing as positive economics? This is where every vote, every like count. And the last one that will be submitted from this session is, does the notion of the utility maximizing rational agent work as ideology justifying unregulated markets and their results? The rest of the questions, even though some great questions are among them, they didn't receive enough support, sufficient support. So after this session closes, they will be obliterated into nothingness. But there will be a lot of other question sessions where you who have proposed these questions can repropose them, and they might gain support, gain likes, and become part of the graph. It's not over yet. But this session, on the other hand, is about to end. And I would like to thank all the participants, our moderators, the production team, everybody being a part of this first day of the plenary and being a part of this day one last session. And I'm looking forward to following what is happening during the weekend and get back with the next input talks and the next question fair session with input talks that continues from Monday. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great evening and a great weekend.
Welcome back to the Lighthouse, and thank you for hanging out with us for the first day of the YSI plenary. I personally think that it was a really interesting day, and wow, some interesting speakers that we've seen. All the questions that you've discussed and submitted in the question sessions will now be uploaded into the galaxy, into the questions graph. And I want to remind you that you can go and pick your favorites even tonight at 3 a.m. At any given time. You can go in and you can pick up to 10 favorites, and that's how at the end of the plenary we will be finding the 100 most pertinent questions. So during the sessions, as you've seen today, after every session in the questions fair, we're going to be discussing the questions submitted by the speakers, submitted by you, how to rephrase them. After the end of the session, the most liked questions will be submitted into the graph, and now you can go and put your favorites so that as the plenary evolves, the question graph is going to evolve with it. And until we start again tomorrow, we're going to be do some reruns. We're going to show some of the talks we had today, so you can come back and see that if you missed anything today. But just before we leave, Jay has some important reminders about tomorrow.
Oh yeah, so important, Thomas, and thank you all for sticking around till the very end of the day, depending on where you are. It's very late here in Europe. I also want to just say, I actually have a question for Thomas. Like, we have all these galaxies, but where are the black holes? Is that where all the questions that didn't make it go? I guess.
That's all the questions that don't get enough votes.
Okay, we have
likes.
We have some work to do on that concept. So thanks for bearing with all the analogies we've been throwing at you all day. I hope that you have gotten the hang of the framework and the system that we have. This last session, thanks to Mats, was absolutely fantastic. I really enjoyed watching it. Now, as we move to the weekend and we're wrapping up this day, it's really time to explore Social Island. I really cannot emphasize enough how important that is for this conference, because as we get our hands dirty in the questions fair and really trying to figure out how we can, figure out which questions are the ones we really want to be working on in the future, it is really important to meet in another format in a social setting. And it's all starting tomorrow. It's starting tomorrow morning, my time in Europe, with the YSI Running Club. Now, guess what? We have some really amazing runners in YSI. Asger Torfason, the chairman of the Community Report Committee, is a long-distance runner, and he, with some others, will be running tomorrow's social. It's at 11 o'clock Central European time, so check your calendar for what that is in your local time. Then, later in the day, and that's really something I care about deeply, is Audra's social that she's organizing, and it's called Meet the Pets. Now guess what kind of pets I'm going to show to you. They're not with me in Copenhagen, they're in Berlin, but I can guarantee you they're dialing in. 2 little bunny boys, and they'll be with us tomorrow. And following up with that, we're going all the way to the beach. Now I guess we're in the Northern Hemisphere, it's getting cold, but not in Brazil, because Elena is giving us a quick introduction about how Brazilians have fun. So the social is called The Beach at Caipirinha. She's going to teach you how to make a caipirinha, and that's going to be one of the better socials around that I can imagine.
That's the one I'm going to.
All right, Thomas, I think you found your social then. Now that wraps it up for us tomorrow, but if you still stick around, I think it's well worth it to come to Christina's social on Sunday morning. And she is going to make a South African dish. And you can cook along, you can check it out right now. She is amazing. She's actually been involved in setting up all the socials with us, so this is well worth it. Come to her social at 10:30 a.m. And you don't have to come prepared, just show up. If you want to have a coffee with everybody, just get social, just talk, just introduce yourself, turn on your camera. This is really one of the things we want to encourage you to do during this plenary. We have all these amazing talks, we have all this amazing interaction, but what really counts at the end of the day is that we do this together, that we get to know each other, and that we remain in this community for a long period of time. And this is basically our opportunity in this virtual world to do that. So with that...
Yeah, that's also the chance for those of you who have met a lot of people at YSI socials all over the world. We don't get to meet each other in person this year, but you will hopefully see some familiar faces on Social Island. And over the weekend, it's time for the working groups to shine. A lot of working group sessions are taking place Saturday and Sunday, and there's going to be no sessions in the questions fair to not distract anything, but then we're starting up with questions fair again on Monday. So see you tomorrow.
Exactly. And we wish you all the best in your presentations, everybody who's presenting tomorrow, all the groups that are running. Thank you to our organizers who are running those sessions tomorrow, and thank you to our mentors who are sitting in to give feedback to all of us. Again, we're doing this together. We're trying to all do this together, and thank you for embarking on this journey with us, this big experiment of holding the YSI plenary online. See you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
There's no denying it. The world is in crisis. Unless you're pure transcendent mind or a nihilist, you might not be fine with it. You might be sick. The climate shifts, titans and tyrants vie for the tightest grip. The crises are diverse. But one might inquire if all of these agonized varieties of strife and rift are underlined by what their one bottom line is. Avarice, affluence, influence, finance. It's a common refrain. Blame the economists. But what job is named by that name? Is it obvious? Is the job that has the broadest effect upon the populace? It would probably be best to define what its province is. Ecos means house. Nomos means rules. It's the rules of the house. But whose house is whose? Why do people lose their houses like you see on the news? People may not be economists, but not all are fools. So what are its tools, and what are its concepts, and what are their underlying ideological contents when we talk about growth, gross domestic product? Just because we've got growth, does growth mean progress? Does it often benefit these and not those? As it speaks the open secrets ideologies impose, do we need to rearrange how economics goes? Rearranged economics spells comic nose. Economic questions, it's an economic question. What the heck is going on? It's an economic question. How's it all connected? How's it gonna get corrected in the present and beyond? It's an economic question. What's the GDP per capita? The total output that's in a society divided by the people that it has in it. The peak in economic speak that's like a country's stamina. The data that when gathered demonstrate its people have the stuff they need. But do they need it? What's that mean? We need to eat. But do we really need a piece of every piece of green in Eden? Are the goods we manufacture really good because they sell? Does economic well-being really mean being well? Could theories be objective when theorists depend on the patronage of people who are able to spend? Does it work for the layman or for them who can lend? Can we make ends meet while we meet common ends. Economic questions, it's an economic question. What is going on? It's an economic question. How's it all connected? How's it gonna get corrected in the present and beyond? It's an economic question. I don't have the answers. I'm not a prophet, nor am I a master of the science of profit. Whether that science is misapplied or a proper fit is up to us. It's something that the science cannot predict. If you want better answers, you need better questions. The best preventive medicine against the depression. All the young economists with honest intentions. See you at the YSI plenary session.